Bonsoir à tous, bienvenue.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome if you join us for this afternoon for this first day of the Virtual Academy for the European Investment Bank. Throughout the day, we have heard from many speakers talking about different topics linked with the financing of small and medium enterprises in the Western and Central Africa region. So we're coming to the end of that day one, and we'll now come to the closing session for this first day of discussion. This is a session during which we will have the occasion with the speakers that I will introduce in a few moments to talk about the different topics that we have covered today and to look at the results from the poll sessions that you took part in and to have a transversal discussion about the topics that we have covered. So without further ado, I will introduce the moderator of this session, Luc Camewe Safak, who's an advisor in the financial sector for the Secretariat of Making Finance Work for Africa, which is an initiative under the European African Development Bank with some private and public initiatives to develop activities within the agriculture, public commerce, trade with an efficient supervisory activity of the financial activities whilst strengthening the financial regulatory framework on the continent. And before that, he worked with the Caisse d'Épargne, giving some strategic advice with Caisse d'Épargne, a former advisor at the Hurricane School, receiving a certificate in 2016, and he holds doctorates in economy from the University of Lyon 2 in France. So without further ado, Hugues, I will give you the floor and give you the opportunity once again to welcome our speakers, Christophe Litte and Olivier Edelman. Okay, many thanks, Annan, for this very warm introduction. Hello to the participants to this virtual European Investment Bank Academy. We're absolutely delighted to be able to have you present in this session and for me to take part in this 30-minute session. And I'm absolutely delighted to welcome once again Mr. Christopher Litte and Mr. Oliver Edelman. Christopher Litte, you've heard him earlier on. He already took part in one session, and yet I will still remind you that he's the head of division of the financial sector, Africa, Caribbean, and Pacific, Asia, and Latin America at the European Investment Bank, based in Luxembourg. As for Oliver Edelman, he's the head of microfinance unit, non-EU equity and microfinance division for the small and medium enterprises at the European Investment Bank, former panel of high-level experts which combine have a very strong experience in the financial sector and in development matters. So therefore, it's an honor to share their presence with us this afternoon. I hope that we have structured these interventions accordingly, and I will come back on the exchanges that took place this morning, especially on the session where we have heard from the central bankers presenting us the perspectives on the development and the current context of our economies and development for small and medium enterprises, and we will then give the floor to Christopher, and each one of them will come back on the session that they have moderated, and also we will cover other relevant aspects. I will now also invite, on that note, our audience to send us some questions that will enable us to feed our exchanges and with the panelists. So coming back to the session that we had this morning, where we had the central bank governors, especially the Central Bank of Ghana, the Central Bank of Congo, and the DRC and the BCAO also, which talked to us about the impact of COVID on our economies and the measures to counter this impact and to accompany the recovery perspectives. We could say quite simply that there were a number of very relevant elements, especially regarding the impact of the crisis, which was very important on African economies, and some measures were undertaken for lockdown, which has led to a drop in production, inflation, and a recession. Nevertheless, less important than what was first anticipated. So as for the measures that were taken, these were some very coordinated measures with some articulation of these particular policies, especially in terms of economic policy and budgetary policy, that were supported by the government, and the monetary policies and the budgetary policies had as main goals to have some fiscal and tax stimulus, which, in order to try to boost the economy in a context where the shock and the macroeconomic shock for the country had led to a recession, and a recessionary trend, which could be particularly massive, and therefore there was such a risk in that area, and we felt that, and we feared that Africa could be impacted economically and go back to some levels that we hadn't seen for about 20 years or so. So these were the themes of our exchanges, and we also heard that the central banks and major governments took some quite strong measures in order to support these fiscal policies and budgetary policies, and it was also a matter of underlining the support for the enterprises in order to strengthen the guarantee of injections of liquidities with some massive purchasing programs with the bank in terms of refinancing, and the drop in the rates for the reserves. In terms of the microfinancial impact from the COVID, we have also noticed that there were also some problems that created to the government and the impacts on some enterprises, and therefore some easing measures were taken, especially regarding the classification for the debts and the levels of penalties, and also how to restitute the debts or how to postpone the debts, which have enabled many enterprises, especially small medium enterprises, to restructure their debts, providing them with some oxygen in that area in which to get through that period. So one of the major trends that was observed during this crisis was the trend to increase digitalization. This was already a trend that was present in our economies. It was accelerated with the crisis due to the complementary measures and to the barrier measures that were imposed because of the crisis. And we have observed in many countries that there has been an acceleration in terms of digitalization, especially in terms of digital finance, which has strengthened and reinforced the fact that a lot of operations and transactions, government payments, G2G, B2B, and so forth, where the situation has created many massive opportunities for economies in terms of developing digital transactions. But of course, this presents some risk, and this was mentioned earlier on by some central bankers, especially everything linked with the cybersecurity, and therefore we also need a legislative framework and regulatory framework in order to better support these structures. Okay, so I can see that we have some time constraints, so I think I will stop there. This is the context in question, and I will now quickly go to our panel members. So if you allow me, I will first of all give the floor to Mr. Olivier Edelman, and Olivier will talk to us and give us his perspective on the session regarding the gender aspects. And Oliver, I will give you the floor. Many thanks, Hugues. Many thanks. So I was delighted to moderate a panel on financing the small and medium enterprises, the new post-COVID, new normal post-COVID, and what are the risks and opportunities associated with this. So I would say that the first point was about the situation that the financial institutions went through during the COVID period. One of the main fears in regards to the financial institutions, especially around March 2020, was that their capacity to find sufficient liquidity could be a difficulty that they could have to confront in the months to follow. In reality, the financial institutions, this is true for the banks and microfinance institutions, they found some liquidity sources that enable them to carry on with their operations almost normally, knowing that their credit and credit portfolio nevertheless diminished in size because the demand dropped and also because the offer dropped also in part. So regarding liquidity, the situation was mastered, and nevertheless, we are all conscious that the difficult loans kept on increasing, which could create some difficulties for financial institutions in the future. And this will come at a moment when the economy will need some financing. The economy will need for the banks to lend in order to kickstart the recovery for the activities for the small and medium enterprises. This was the first point that we covered. And then the financial institutions who took part in that debate pointed the finger on the fact that, first of all, the element that consists in the capacity to reach their clients and to keep on operating with their clients during the crisis, which is, of course, to use the digital tools that were very useful during the crisis. It has enabled them to carry on operating almost normally in some situations such as the curfews and lockdowns and so forth. So this was one of the main lessons of the crisis, which is that these tools had a positive impact. Nevertheless, at the same time, what came out from the conversations is that the financial institutions also felt the need to be closer to their clients, which could seem quite a paradox in a period where we were far away from our clients, but yet they wish to be closer to their clients and to better know their clients and to be better aligned with their needs. And once again, the technological tools and the data were pointed as being some solutions that will enable to better understand the needs from the clients and to offer them some better adapted solutions to their demands. So, globally, I would say that the conclusions were quite positive or optimistic as far as the financial institutions are concerned on the post-COVID situation and their capacity to operate again in more or less the same manner as they did in 2019, even if we are not yet at the level of lending that we had at the time. As for the panel, we also had the vision from people representing in some ways the small and medium enterprises. They were their voice in a way and indicated, and I think we all agree on that, that access to finances remains difficult these days for very small enterprises in Africa. There are a series of reasons that could explain this difficulty in accessing this funding and financing, despite everything undertaken by the financial institutions. But yet there was a call for coordination of the actors on the ground, which includes a whole raft of institutions. And we're talking about the banking and financial institutions, the central banks, the regulators, the legislators, in order to set up an environment that could support access to financing for the small and medium enterprises, especially the smallest and most vulnerable amongst them. So it's not just an action from one financial institution or another that would be sufficient. We really need a whole movement as a group from all the stakeholders in order not to necessarily bring a solution to the problem, but certainly to contribute to some ways forward to have some elements of response and answers that could reply to the needs from the small and medium enterprises. We also talked about a tool which was the stock scoring. This will enable to reduce the uncertainty of the banking institutions, and we had a quite interesting presentation on that topic also. A few words about what we talk gender, access to finance for women. As you know, the European Investment Bank highlights these matters more and more, and we will offer some credit lines that will be dedicated and for which we will ask our financial intermediaries to dedicate them more and more to granting access to finance for women. There is She Invest facility set up by the European Investment Bank. It's aimed at a series of operations that support the access to financing for women within the African continent. Of course, none of that can take place from one day to the next, and it necessitates some technical assistance in order to accompany and support the microfinance institutions as well as the financial and banking institutions to adapt their offers to the specific needs of women when they need some finances and funding in order to launch or maintain their activities. So this is a very important point. We need to adapt the credit processes. We need to adapt the products that meet the precise needs, especially of women, when they request some credit. I will stop on that point, and I will leave my colleague to carry on with that discussion. Many thanks. Many thanks, Olivier, for summarizing the debates so well and for giving us these perspectives, and especially when you talked about this fund that was with the European Investment Bank dealing with the gender aspects. I will now go to Christophe and invite him to speak about this session on some aspects, and if he can talk to us about his session, because I know that the session has just finished, but if you can give us the main points, and I will also invite the audience to send us their questions, and we'll probably then be able to take a couple of questions. Christophe, you have the floor. Yes, many thanks, Hugo. Hello, everybody. I will try to summarize briefly because I don't think we have much time left, but I will try to summarize the discussions of the panel dedicated to green finance. This was a very interesting panel. It was made up with some representatives of financial institutions of a very varied nature, each with their own perspective, approach, challenges, and they all have deployed some products that are different but yet complementary. Each of them also has a very clear priority regarding green finance. So, first of all, we talked about a product that has been deployed since 2016, African Guarantee Fund, and this is a green guarantee, a product that enables the banks to reduce the risk undertaken when they finance some green projects. So this is a guarantee for the first demand and first request, which enables these banks to finance and take more risk in order to finance a series of green projects that would not have been financed otherwise, and also combined with technical assistance for the banks in order to improve especially the review and monitoring of the environmental risk, but also for the small and medium enterprises to strengthen the solidity of the green projects that they intend to finance. Also, we talked about some completely different topics with the person in charge of the microfinance bank in Nigeria, Let's Go Microfinance Bank, and on that point, we have managed to better understand how the green financing also applies to small projects, small societies, and also individuals, and especially with a particular focus on saving energies, and also climate side, which is absolutely key for these projects to be generating benefits. And we talked about the project with this bank regarding these particular themes and issues. We have also focused on the production of green electricity with a product that is deployed by ATI, and that enables the entrepreneurs who want to produce green electricity to guarantee that they will be paid by national electricity companies. We have underlined once again the importance of collaboration between the public sector and the private sector. And here, the main idea was to have some bankable projects by reducing the risks taken by some entrepreneurs. And then EcoBank Ghana has insisted on the profitability of the green projects, and we had an explanation regarding different examples linked with digitalization, for example, the production of solar panels, photovoltaic panels locally, and also within the innovation in order to replace some industrial processes that are old and polluting, and how to install some photovoltaic panels on half of the roofs of these agencies and branches, which are investments that are reimbursed within a 5-year period. So we see a global approach from this bank on regarding the environment, with an analysis of also of its project on the basis of its environmental impact. So to conclude, we can see that there are a series of financial instruments that are combined, especially with technical assistance for the small and medium enterprises and for the banks, and as for the production of renewable energy, and as for the energy efficiency, that also enables an optimal collaboration between the public sector and the private sector. And I think that this global approach is necessary, and this will maybe enable us to meet the challenges presented by climate change. So this is what I can tell you in a few words. I don't know if you want me to talk about digitalization too. Very quickly, very quickly. Okay, I have my colleague Benoît Denis, who was the moderator on that particular panel, which has just finished. He has sent me a few notes, and therefore we have 3 main trends. We can note that online banks in Africa constitute 50% of the structures dealing with mobile money. There are more than 150 of them, between 150 and 200 of them. And then, as you have underlined, Hugues, there is a real transformation of traditional banks to initiate a digital transformation in order to become more efficient, but also to offer new services, and also a modernization of payment systems. So at a national level, but also at a regional level. And therefore, once again, there is a certain fear from the public regarding e-banking. There are also some constraints regarding the infrastructure and the need and necessity to be able to benefit from an economy at scale, which takes a while, but yet this is a sector that enables the creation of many jobs in the future for the African youth. Many thanks. Very quickly, in 30 seconds, Olivier. What do you think of the new projects, for example, regarding access to financing, especially in the region? And what do you think about the resilience that we have observed throughout the crisis and coming out of the crisis? Many thanks. Well, I think that from what we have observed is that the sector, in fact, was quite resilient. Whether we're talking about the microfinance institutions, that's the area I know best, but also about the clients and the microfinance institutions. And micro entrepreneurs were very resilient, and maybe more the big microfinance institutions compared to smaller ones. But globally, the crisis caused some damage, but yet this was more or less mastered. And what will be crucial now is for institutions to be able to lend and finance the sector. So therefore, there is a recovery in terms of the situation. Otherwise, the situation could degrade itself much more in the future. Okay, many thanks. We do not have much time left, but what I would like to say is that the central banks especially work on these matters in terms of climate finance, in terms of gender finance, and this is obviously always taken into account, and how this can be supported so that we can implement some actions in the sector to act on the impact on the sector. And I will stop on these words, and I will give the floor back to Anand. Many thanks to the members of my panel. Many thanks for your participation and for the audience. Many thanks too. Anand, I'm happy to give you the floor. Many thanks. Many thanks, Hugues, for the moderation of this closing session, which was summing up, amongst other things, the different discussions that took place throughout the day today. Many thanks also to Christophe Erlit, Head of Division Financial Sector for the various regions for the European Investment Bank, and Olivier Edelman, Head of Microfinance Unit. Right. Many thanks to you three for this summary. So we do not have much time left. This event is coming to an end, but before we give way to the closing session for this first day of the Virtual Academy for the European Investment Bank, I suggest we take a short pause, and we'll meet you again in 5 minutes. Many thanks.